Hi, and welcome to part two of Living with Saci. Are you sitting comfortably? Then we'll begin. Chapter 2 The Fiancé, 12th of January 2016. What's your health plan? The nurse asked. Banco Sao Paulo, Teresa answered. The nurse frowned. We don't work with them, she said, handing Teresa another piece of paper. What's this? Teresa asked. Your invoice. The nurse gesticulated to a cupboard in the corner. Your clothes, she said, turning on her heels and leaving before Teresa could form any thoughts into sentences. She looked at the paper. Jesus! What did they do to her? How long had she been in the hospital? They hadn't fixed her teeth. Her jaw ached worse than it had ever. She examined the paper, but none of it made sense except the large number at the bottom. All the savings she had put aside to see her daughter would be swallowed up by this. Teresa opened the cupboard and discovered her clothes in a neat pile on the bottom shelf. She got dressed as quickly as she could and, leaving the room, found herself in a long white hospital corridor opposite the nurse's station. Excuse me, she said to the woman behind the counter who seemed engrossed in paperwork. Excuse me, she repeated. Just a minute. The woman did not look up from her sea of forms. Teresa waited. She shifted, coughed, looked around. The woman looked up. Yes, she asked. I think there's been some mistake, Teresa said, showing the woman the piece of paper. I'm not sure how long I've been here, but... No mistake, the woman interrupted after the briefest of glances at the sheet. But it seems rather a lot, Teresa protested. You'll have to speak to your health plan for reimbursement. Do you know how long I've been here? Did the police bring me here? Teresa asked. I just got on, the woman answered, burying her head in her papers again, suggesting the conversation was over. Teresa looked around and headed for the exit. Felipe, her fiancé, must be worried sick by now. She hadn't spoken to him since the argument, and she hadn't replied to his text before going to see the dentist. She also wanted to ask him if he knew anything about Oliver, her missing cat. She thought she heard the nurse shouting something after her, but she just ignored it and headed for the exit, having to squeeze past a couple of police officers who wanted to use the automatic sliding doors at the same time as her. She left the hospital car park and stepped out into the bright daylight of São Bernardo do Campo. São Bernardo do Campo was much like any other satellite city of São Paulo. Grey concrete, broken tarmac, tangle of black wires overhead strung from decaying concrete lampposts. Half-finished buildings rising out of every hill, their fragile brick facades surrounded with veils like virgins on their wedding days. Teresa knew that the veils were there to stop bits falling off the buildings from killing anyone on the dirty streets below, and if anything, Teresa thought the streets of São Bernardo do Campo were a little bit filthier than most. Summer was well underway now, and the cockroaches were venturing out of the drains to escape the heat and feast on the detritus strewn around. She had no money, no cards, no phone, no idea of anyone's phone number, and seeing as though the hospital hadn't mentioned that she was too ill to attempt to walk the 5 kilometers back to her house, she set off. In fact, the hospital had said nothing about her condition. They didn't seem too worried. They had offered her to use their phone, but Teresa didn't know any phone numbers. When she was younger, before mobile phones, she could remember at least a few: her parents' home phone, their work phones, her work phone, her home phone, her boyfriend's home and work phone, when she had one, which was not often. Now the only number she could remember was her own. So what to do? She couldn't call anyone. She couldn't pay for a bus or a taxi to get home. Then she remembered biometrics. She could use a cash point without her card just by using a fingerprint. Brilliant. Now all she had to do was find a bank. She looked up and down the street, recognized where she was, and started walking towards where she knew the city centre was. She felt a few drops of water bounce off her cheek. She looked up at the grey sky, and another droplet landed in her eye. She looked at the pavement as she walked, and watched the light grey concrete become a lightened grey polka dot, with the dots becoming more plentiful. Bugger, she thought, recalling the moment she disposed of the last broken umbrella in a street bin. Oh well, Sapella needed the rain after months of drought, and getting a little bit wet was by no means the worst thing that had happened to her recently. The rain wasn't heavy enough to soak her, just sufficient to make her feel damp as the droplets soaked into her blouse and gave the material the feeling of a wet dishcloth. By the time she reached the bank, she was no more she was more damp and was conscious that she was dripping on the polished tile floor. To reach the cash machines during the day, she had first to negotiate a revolving door that was in reality a metal detector, which would refuse to turn at the slightest hint of guns, bombs, knives, keys, coins, or mobile phones. She would need to empty the contents of her pockets into a small perspex tray built into the door, designed to shield benign metal objects from the metal detecting door while making them visible to the security guard. Usually, Teresa carried so much metal that it was easier to deposit her handbag in one of the lockers at the bank's entrance. Today, she had had most of her metal objects stolen, so she just needed to drop her keys into the perspex tray, and pushing at the door, she found it moved without objection. At the cash machine, instead of inserting her card, Teresa touched the screen and, when prompted, placed her right index finger on the fingerprint reader. Happy with her identity, the machine asked what service Teresa would like to perform. She asked for a modest amount of money so as not to venture too much further towards her already embarrassing overdraft limit. She heard the machine counting the notes. Teresa grabbed the cash and stuffed it into her pocket. At least she hadn't lost her keys too, she thought as she reached home, fumbling for the one which unlocked the padlock on the gate. She twisted the key in the lock and, shutting the gate behind her, opened the door leading straight into the kitchen, taking care lest her remaining cat escape. There was no sign of Felipe. She looked in all the rooms, and it was just when she returned to the kitchen that she noticed the folded piece of paper on the small metal kitchen table. She picked it up and read Felipe's handwriting. I have gone to end it all. I think you will be happier without me. Teresa slumped onto a kitchen chair. She knew that things had been bad, but not this bad. At first it seemed like some sick joke. Teresa tried to find her address book to get the number for her brother's wife. She was a police officer. She would know what to do. Teresa preferred to speak to Selma than calling Felipe's family. As Teresa waited for Selma to arrive, she fed the remaining, now ravenous cat, Ramsay. There was still no sight of Oliver, but as she searched the flat, opening every cupboard in case the moggy had trapped itself somewhere, she found Felipe's phone. Teresa found herself opening Felipe's messages and looking at the messages he'd sent her just before his disappearance, and in the past hours and day, right up to the last SMS he'd sent telling her he loved her just before she was called in to see the dentist. Scanning down through them in reverse order was a bizarre rewind from desperation, anger, despair, recriminations, doubt, paranoia, ultimata, entreaties, irritation, worry, questions, and at first declarations of love. Teresa began to panic. The police would want to see his phone. What if they saw all these messages? They would question her involvement in his disappearance, especially considering the content of some of the messages. Could this jeopardize her position at the school? What should she do? She couldn't risk anything that might lead to her losing her job, but what could she do? She couldn't delete all the messages, could she? The police were bound to be even more suspicious if there was no evidence of her boyfriend having texted her. Perhaps she could delete some of the worst messages. She tried not to look at his note on the table at the other side of the kitchen. Teresa could feel him stirring from wherever he was. She went through his text and deleted the most incriminating. What else? She scanned through his other messages to his mum and dad and sister, the general collection of abbreviations that Teresa struggled to decipher. Why hadn't he gone to his family? That's what confused Teresa. Was his relationship with them as bad as he had said? Why not just go to them if he couldn't take things any longer? She made herself a large gin and tonic, and then felt guilty that she'd been so selfish, thinking about herself when Felipe could be. She couldn't bear to think what might have happened to him. She heard a sound of clapping from outside and put down the phone, shut Ramsay in the living room, and walked to the door, unlocking it. Selma stood at the other side of the gate, Teresa's brother's wife. Teresa fumbled with the keys as she tried to open the gate, and then hugged Selma before her sister-in-law pushed past her and into the kitchen. Teresa closed the gate and then stood, feeling like a spare part, as she watched Selma examine Felipe's note. Selma pulled out her phone, dialed a number, and within a moment was talking rapidly. Teresa could never understand Selma at the best of times because of her slang, even when Selma was speaking to her slowly and directly. Teresa struggled to understand, so this conversation was impossible to follow, except for the occasional he and her. Teresa gave up watching and sat on the kitchen chair, picking up Felipe's phone. Selma hung up and turned to Teresa. She looked at the phone in Teresa's hands. Is that his? She asked. Yes, Teresa replied, and handed the phone over to Selma. Selma tapped the screen and then examined the contents for a moment before pocketing the device. Shit, thought Teresa, but she'd always felt intimidated by Selma and was not about to ask for the phone back. Then came the questions. Just routine, Selma assured, trying to ascertain where Felipe might have gone and whether the note meant what it seemed to say. The questioning seemed to Teresa to go on forever. Teresa remembered a conversation she'd once had with Felipe at the beach when he had told her that his preferred method of suicide would be drowning, and she described a location to her sister-in-law. Selma several times invited Teresa to spend the night at her house, but each time Teresa refused. It's very kind of you, said Teresa, but I just want to be left by myself to gather my thoughts. After several more attempts to convince her, and a protracted and awkward phone conversation with Teresa's brother, Selma prayed for her and then left her alone. Teresa felt alone in the empty house, and yet she couldn't help the strange sensation that at any moment she might see Felipe around every corner. She let Ramsay out of the living room, made herself another large gin and tonic. She took it into the bedroom. Felipe was not there. She slipped off her clothes and crawled under the sheets. Ramsay, her remaining black cat, seemed aware of her distress, curled up close to her. Everything else could wait until tomorrow. Teresa tried to sit up, unable to move. Someone seemed to have secured her somehow. She had her hands tied. She was back at the dentist's surgery, fastened to the chair. The dentist was there. He had his back to Teresa, but reached out a charred arm from which black, putrid skin began to fall away, revealing pink, cooked flesh and bone. The dentist turned his charred face to Teresa, and his bony hand removed his blood-stained surgical mask to reveal Felipe's tormented face. Water, Felipe's ghost pleaded with her. Why did you let me bury me? You know I'm not dead. Dead, Felipe leant closer to kiss her, pieces of his decomposing nose falling onto her face. Teresa opened her mouth to scream as loud as her lungs would allow, but a slither of burnt flesh dropped into her mouth, stifling all sound and causing Teresa to vomit. She awoke, sitting upright, a pool of vomit soaking into the thin sheet that covered her lap, and now began to stick to her sweat and vomit-covered thighs. It was still dark. Teresa bundled up the wet sheet as best she could, and trying her utmost not to drop any vomit on the carpet, carried the sheet into the bathroom and dumped it onto the cold tile floor. Switching on the light, Teresa glanced at her pallid face in the mirror before dousing it in cold water. She patted her face dry with a hand towel that smelt of Felipe. She could feel the anxiety welling up inside her as she contemplated where he might have gone or what he might have done. Teresa switched off the bathroom light and then hovered in the bedroom. She decided against going back to bed and chose instead to go into the kitchen and make herself a drink. She watched it clink as it tumbled into the glass, and then seemed to crackle with delight as Teresa poured in a generous helping of gin. She developed a taste for gin during her years in England, and had found this cheap brand on her return to Brazil. Even the tonic seemed to fizz with enthusiasm as it joined the mix. If Felipe were here now, she thought, he'd be reminding me how gin causes depression. How ironic that it seemed to her now as she took a large gulp of a cold fizzy drink that seemed the best thing she'd tasted in days, or at least hours. Teresa slumped on her makeshift sofa, a mattress on two piles of pallets, and listened to the rain that started to fall outside. She had just finished the glass when fatigue got the better of her, and she curled up where she was and dropped off to sleep once more. Teresa woke, wondering where Felipe was. Then her memory came flooding back to her, and she shivered in horror, wanted to go back to sleep and forget about it all, but it was too late. Her head was already full of the images of the dentist, and Ramsay had decided it was time for Teresa to feed him. There was nothing more she could do but to get up and face the day. Teresa sat up and shuffled out of bed. She wandered into the bathroom and realized how clean it was. The bedroom had been tidy too, and as Teresa walked through the rest of the house, noticing that the living room and kitchen were also spotless. Why didn't she notice this yesterday? So he tidied the house before he left? Teresa felt even guiltier now, but there was no reason she could think of for not making coffee, so after feeding the hungry cat, she did that and sat down. Teresa was on holiday. One of the benefits of working in her school was 15 weeks off. It would be at least another 2 weeks before she would have to go back to work and explain anything to anyone. The trouble was, she would have to spend those 2 weeks dealing with her family and Felipe's family and all the questions. Teresa was listening to the coffee machine, spitting its contents into the glass jug, and watching Ramsay munching on his breakfast, when a slow round of applause outside the gate caught her attention. Teresa shut Ramsay in the living room again and went to the door. Oh God, it was Selma. Bloody hell, what time is it? Thought Teresa. She tried to change her facial expression from annoyance to welcome as quickly as she could, but without much success. I've had some news, said Selma, looking at Teresa in her dressing gown and slippers. What is it? Teresa looked at Selma and realized it was not good. They found his clothes, she said, and his wallet. So, there ends chapter 2 of Living with Saci. Keep an eye on my YouTube channel. You can probably subscribe somewhere down there or something. You can even probably like it or something if you want. Knock yourself out. Why not? Keep an eye on my channel for chapter 3, which will be coming up before you know. Thanks for watching. See you next time.